President Cyril Ramaphosa has called for the lifting of U.S. sanctions against Cuba. This was ahead of a UN General Assembly vote on Cuba's annual resolution against the embargo in New York. Ramaphosa said South Africa would vote with Cuba. The 56-year-old U.S. sanctions have caused severe economic hardship there. South Africa noted that actually the majority of the international community wanted it lifted. Let's cross now to William Densler, our correspondent in New York, to tell us more. Will South Africa's support, could South Africa's support make a difference here?
Well, essentially, in terms of the voting, in terms of getting a majority at the United Nations General Assembly, the message is overwhelmingly, yes, South Africa can certainly make a difference. We've heard from Jerry Magila, the South African ambassador to the United Nations, saying that South Africa will vote along with a couple of key blocs, such as the Group of 77 plus China. Morocco, they say they concur with the message that was delivered by the representative for Morocco, who's representing the African group. So just a couple of messages there coming from the South African official that they will very much toe the line when it comes to the overwhelming majority of the international community condemning this embargo on the United States. But in terms of whether it will make a difference, the answer is ultimately most likely going to be no. Of course, this is just another year where Cuba has put forward this resolution. The international community tends to overwhelmingly vote in favour. In fact, last year alone, it was only the United States and Israel that voted against the measure. However, very important to note that this General Assembly vote, unlike those seen at the UN Security Council, are non-binding. So in terms of this being translated into any tangible actions, perhaps those in the international community will once again be left rather disappointed.
Yeah, you know, you think of Donald Trump here. Obviously, he's not in support of this, probably because Barack Obama set the ball rolling here. I mean, how important is he when it comes to normalizing the relationship with Cuba?
Well, absolutely crucial, of course. Let's not forget that we saw a historic thawing of relations back in 2014 with President Obama at the helm. We started to see a degree of the sanctions being rolled back, but under President Trump, we've seen that very much reversed. And of course, we're just less than a week away until the midterm elections, and several key members of the Trump administration, including John Bolton, are in Florida, which of course is a crucial state considering the huge amount of Cubans that have fled the country and are now residing in the US, that are of course largely prominent critics of the government in Cuba. So we can expect John Bolton to come out in his addresses this week, to come out very strongly, to even, as far as it's being suggested in the US media, to come out with even further stringent measures and sanctions on the Cuban military. So certainly things moving in the wrong direction as far as thawing relations between Cuba and the US is concerned. Of course, this was very much reiterated by President Ramaphosa when he said that, in fact, these embargoes have become even more stringent under President Trump.
And they've been there for many, many years. What sort of impact has it had? Paint us more of a picture of life there under these embargoes and sanctions.
Well, it's seen as incredibly tough. Of course, they were initially put in place in 1959. We saw the initial restriction put on products such as the US import of Cuban sugar. That was then widely expanded to including pretty much all products coming from Cuba. That was under the administration of JFK in the 1960s, and that has largely remained in effect, of course, throughout the Cold War. We heard incredibly strong message from Russia's UN ambassador speaking at the General Assembly Hall when he described the embargo that remains in place as a relic of the Cold War that is counterproductive and unjustified. In terms of the restrictions, of course, the famous example, of course, over the years, things have loosened somewhat, but of course, countless examples of people trying to smuggle in Cuban cigars into the United States, for example. Still, if you're a traveller in the United States going to Cuba, you still need to give a reason for entering the country, whether it's on religious grounds or sporting activities and things like that. So there are still restrictions, and that has become even tougher under the Trump administration. More restrictions on tourists looking to go to Cuba, more restrictions on businesses hoping to do business there, and of course this has had knock-on implications for nations trying to do business with Cuba. Of course, we heard from Jerry Magia, who said that in terms of trading relations between South Africa and Cuba, this embargo impacts that as well. So this certainly has huge implications, this embargo, not in terms of the direct relationship between the US and Cuba, but for the international community trying to do business there as well. And for the people on the ground, of course, there are countless stories of the hardships that people there do face. But the message from the United States is that this embargo does remain in place, but and while this message has been delivered to the UN, what the United States wants to see is more action from the officials, from authorities in Cuba, to do more when it comes to what the US sees an incredibly punitive system when it comes to clamping down on people's human rights. That's what the US say, and what the Trump administration says they want to see improve out of Cuba.
All right, I'm sure Cuba's looking for a bit of respite there. Thanks for that. William Denslow reporting from our New York office. Is enough being done to protect victims in violent same-sex relationships? Up next, we take a look at intimate partner violence.